Salve omnes, welcome to this video lesson on Fabulae Syrae 28, section 4, Cyparissus. Cyparissus formosissimus adolescens fuit. Cyparissus was a most beautiful or most handsome young man, qui ob Apolline diligebatur, who was loved by Apollo. Ob Apolline, ablative of agent there. Quotidie per silvas et campos errans, so errans wandering daily, quotidie, through the forests and the fields. And now on this next clause, it's a little bit complex, so we'll break it down. Feras quae ibi versabantur persecutus capiebat. Literally what we have is having pursued, persecutus, wild animals, feras, which were there, quae ibi versabantur, he caught them, capiebat. Now, in English, we would do this with two verbs linked together. We would say he pursued and captured wild animals. But in Latin, you frequently get this with a nominative participle, here persecutus, agreeing with the subject, and then a main verb after that. And that's what we have here. So again, having pursued wild animals which were there, he caught them. But that's the same as saying he pursued and caught wild animals which were there. Now, where sabantur? I'm translating that almost as if it were errant, because where Syrae can be used as kind of an alternative for esse, the being verb. If you wanted to say which were hanging out there, which were frequently there, something like that, that's kind of the force of it. Of course, the verb root has to do with turning around, so just sort of, I always imagine kind of like spinning around in the spot when I get this idiom. But it's a pretty normal thing to see this verb used as an equivalent for esse. All right, delectabatur vero ingente quodam cervo, but he was delighted by a certain huge stag. So ingains is huge. Quodam there from quidam is certain. And cervus, as you can see out in the margin, is a male deer, a stag in European terms, or a buck in American English. All right, qui magna et lata cornua in capite gerebat, who bore or carried gerebat, huge and wide horns, or big and wide horns, magna et lata cornua, on his head, in capite. Now, I think technically in English we might call these antlers here, so if you want to translate cornua as antlers, that's fine. Quae nymphae auro gemisque ita ornaverant, which the nymphs had decorated, ornaverant, pluperfect, with gold and with gems. Notice auro, gemis, those are in the ablative of means, with gold and with gems, in such a way, ita, so, thus, in such a way. And now we get a result clause, right? Ita is the signpost word telling us, hey, adverbial result clause coming. All right, so the following ut clause is a result clause. Ut etiam in obscura silva lucerent, that they even gleamed, all right, lucerent, gleamed, in a dim or dark forest. Ipse cervus, the stag himself, sine metu, without fear, hominum domos adire solebat, was accustomed to go to people's houses. All right? In other words, he frequently went to people's houses. All right? Qui, and the qui is going to refer back to the people. Manus extendentes eius colum tergumque tengebant, who, extending their hands, touched his neck and his back. Notice the eius, his, refers to the stag. Ille enim, for he, and that's going to refer to the stag. Here we can see a little inset picture about the myth. Cyparissus, cervo sagita percusso, ob animi dolorem in arborem mutatur. Cyparissus, with the stag stricken by an arrow, is changed into a tree on account of the pain of his mind. Now, Cyparissus, his name actually means cypress, right? So, yeah, this is one of those myths where you're basically talking about the origin of something. How did the cypress tree come into existence? Well, there was this dude and he got turned into one, right? So there are a lot of myths like this, like Pan and Syrinx. Syrinx becomes a reed. Apollo and Daphne. Daphne becomes a laurel tree. Laurel tree in ancient Greek is Daphne. Reed in ancient Greek is Syrinx. So Cyparissus, same thing. His name means what he turns into. All right, so picking back up on the story, so we had Ille for he, meaning stag. Colum manibus quamquam ignotis non sine gaudio offerebat. For he offered, offerebat, his neck, colum, to the hands, manibus, that's stated. Quamquam ignotis, although unknown. All right, so the people he's going up to and offering his neck to their hands are unknown to him, right? So the ignotis here is dative agreeing with monibus, describing the people's hands. He doesn't know the people, but he's just such a tame animal. He walks right up to people he has no idea who they are and lets them sort of pet him and so on. All right, last phrase here, non sine gaudio, not without joy. So he really got into this. The stag loved to get petted. Prae ceteris, beyond the rest, Cyparissus eum tam multum delegebat. Cyparissus loved him so much, tam multum. And that tam is one of those signpost words that tells us we've got a result clause coming. So then the following ut clause is adverbial result. Ut quotidie ad novos campos duceret. That daily he would lead him to new fields, ad novos campos. Ut bonam herbam eset. And notice eset has the long e, so this is the verb for eating rather than verb for being. In order that he might eat good grass, et ad rapidos fluvios ageret, and he drove him to rapid streams or rivers, ut puram aquam biberet, in order that he might drink pure water. Okay, now both of those clauses there, when I'm translating in order that he might, those ut clauses are purpose clauses. They tell you why he did this, right? Why did Cyparissus drive the stag to these places? In order that he get the good grass, in order that he get the good water, right? So these are both purpose clauses. Just like result clauses, they have the ut at the beginning, and they have the subjunctive verbs. Floribus variorum calorum cervi cornua mirabili modo ornabat. He decorated, ornabat, the stag's antlers, cervi cornua, with flowers of various colors, all right, Floribus variorum colorum, in a wonderful way, mirabili modo. That's an ablative of manner. The floribus there with the flowers, that's the ablative of means. All right. Et tamquam eques, and as if an equestrian, a horse rider, in eius tergosidens, sitting on his back, huc et illuc vehebatur, he was carried here and there. So the tamquam eques, the simile there, as if a horse rider, as if a horseman, that's comparing Cyparissus to a horseman because he jumps on the stag's back and runs about here and there, right? Olimwero, but once, quoniam aer caledissimus erat, since the air was very hot, circa meridiem, around midday, cervus fessus, the stag tired out, fessus, suum corpus in herbosa terra posuit, placed his body in the grassy ground, or on the grassy ground, sub altae arboris umbra, under the shade of a tall tree, ut frigus ibi caperet, in order that he there might take the cool, or receive the cool. And I think this is the cool of the shaded area, right? Cyparissus autem. Moreover, Cyparissus, or however, Cyparissus, rather, we could say here. Autem is one of those words that helps you sort of move on in a narrative. So sometimes it makes sense to translate it as moreover, sometimes however. You can almost say and then sometimes, but I like to stick to moreover and however. It's a little bit of a fancier word for transition. So Cyparissus, however, imprudens, unwise or being unwise. Dum suo arcu in silva ludit, while he was playing with his bow, suo arcu, in the woods, in silva. And note here I said while he was playing, even though ludit looks like it would be maybe present tense. That's because in this type of a doom clause, when the main verb is a past tense, as percussit is perfect, you want to translate the doom clause verb as past, even though it's present, right? So while he was playing with his bow in the forest, sagita cervum subarbore cubantim forte percussit. He struck the stag with an arrow, and then cubantim describes the stag, notice it's accusative, while it's lying under a tree. Cumero, but when, accurrins, running up, eum morientem vidit, he saw it dying, or saw him dying, meaning the stag. Ite turbatus est animo, he was so disturbed in his mind. All right, and here we're talking about Cyparissus. Ut ipse cum cervo mori velit, that he himself wanted to die with the stag. So that ut clause is again one of these result clauses. Notice the ita signpost word introducing it. Apollo, qui postquam puri clamores audiverat, ad eum maerintem accurrerat mortis verbis, eum consolare conabatur. So conabatur, Apollo, who, all right, that's the qui, had run up to him grieving, accurrerat, pluperfect, ad eum maerintem, after he had heard the boy's shouts, postquam, through audiverat. And now we come back to the main clause. Tried, conabatur, to console him, consolare eum, with many words. Neque tamen facere potuit, nor, nevertheless, could he achieve, could he do it, bring it about, perhaps, facere. Ut miseramus puer, minus ob delectissimae bestiae mortem doleret. That the most pitiful boy, ut miseramus puer, should grieve less, doleret minus, on account of the death of the most beloved beast. All right? So, nor nevertheless could he bring it about that the most miserable boy would grieve less on account of the death of the most beloved beast. Plorabat enim ille, for he was crying. Plorabat is kind of a synonym for lacrimabat, or he was crying. Ac multis cum lacrimis flebat, and he was weeping with many tears. So phleo, phlere is another synonym for lacrimo and ploro. Tam tristis erat, he was so sad. And here again, Tom is a signpost word, so as you might guess, we've got a result clause coming. Ut vire jam nolet, that he did not want to live now. Imo, nay rather, or no, on the other hand, a deis inter lacrimas petivet. He sought from the gods in the midst of his tears, or among his tears, ut sibi flere sine fine liceret, that he be permitted, or literally, that it be permitted to him to cry without limit. All right, now that ut clause coming after petiwit adeis, he sought from the gods, this is what he asked them to do. So this is what's called an indirect command, right? Because he's sort of telling the gods to do this, right? And so ut through likaret, again, indirect command. Those, just like purpose clauses, will start with ut or ne. Result clauses always start with the ut. All right, and continuing, et iam membra in viridim colorem verti atque capilli quibus candida frons aperiabatur horere coiperunt. And now his limbs, membra, began, all right, so coiperunt at the end, began, to turn into green color, all right, verti in viridim colorem, and his hairs, with which his white forehead was covered, all right, so I guess he has a pale complexion. The hairs with which his white forehead was covered began to horere, to get shaggy or be shaggy, right? Horio horere, just as a reminder, this can mean to be frightened, but it often refers to like sort of the physical reaction of, so-called hairs standing on end, right? You get that pricking feeling on the back of your neck or something like that when you're afraid. And it often can refer to things sticking up like that. So sort of like the bristly hair sticking up on the back of a boar, or here we're talking about, I think, the leaves growing on the tree and getting kind of shaggy in that way. So be aware of that. That verb has a meaning of be frightened, but it can also have this more physical meaning of things kind of standing out and being shaggy looking, right? Okay, so the hairs with which his shining white forehead was covered began to be shaggy. Cyparissus tunc arbor factus est, alta et rigida. Then Cyparissus was made a tree, tall and rigid. Cuius pars summa, whose highest part, caelum stellis ornatum spectare videbatur, whose highest part, what seemed to, all right, videbatur, the passive of video often means seem, so seemed to look at, spectare, the sky decorated with stars. All right, and I think here we're meaning that it points, right? It's got a point at the top that goes straight up. Apollo igitur, therefore Apollo, tristis ad arbore macedens, sad, approaching the tree or going to the tree. Ego inquit, says I, semper te flebo, amice, will always weep for you, my friend, amice. Tuero, but you, alios flebis, will weep for others, et dolentibus hominibus, omni tempore aderes, and you will be present, aderes, future tense, at all times, or at every time, omni tempore, for grieving people, dolentibus hominibus. Now, why is he saying this? Again, this is one of these myths that explains the origin of some type of thing, in this case a cypress tree. The reason he's saying this, as you can see in the picture, a sepulchrum is a tomb, and cypress trees in ancient times were planted around grave sites. And you sometimes see this practice still today. In some graveyards in the U.S. and certainly in Europe, you can find cypress trees around the outside. It's a type of evergreen tree, and so just look for them next time you're at a cemetery or graveyard. You might find a cypress tree. All right. Hoc est cur arborem, quae ex illo puro Graece Cyparissi, Latine vero cupresi nomen habet, prope amicorum nostrorum sepulchra ponamus. All right, so this is why, hoc est cur, this is why we place the tree, ponamus arborem, which from that boy is called Cyparissus in Greek, but in Latin is called Cupressus, right? So that's where we get cypress from. Cypress is coming more clearly from cupressus, right, which is the Latin word. Obviously, cupressus is related to the Greek word Cyparissus, but yeah, so our word is more directly derived from that. All right, so this is the reason why we place the tree, which has its name from that boy Cyparissus in Greek, in Latin Cypressus. This is why we place it near the tombs of our friends. All right, now that is a very complex sentence. Let me see if I can break it into a more normal English word order. So this is the reason why we place near the tombs of our friends this tree, which has the name of Cyparissus in Greek, and in Latin, the name of Cupressus from that boy. I don't know. All right, this is why we place the tree near the tombs of our friends, the tree which has the name of Cyparissus in Greek from that boy, but the name of Cupressus in Latin. Yeah, that's a little better. Okay, let's stop there. You get the point here that it's just a complex sentence, so taking it directly, literally from Latin into English is a little bit tricky, even though it's very clear what it means. Okay, I hope you learned a few things there. Practice maybe with some of the different clauses, indirect questions, purpose, result, all of that, indirect commands, and maybe some vocabulary, maybe something about the myth itself if you're not familiar with this myth. Volete omnes.